I do.
Hi, I'm Femi OK.
I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream.
Today, how will failed US-Taliban talks impact Afghanistan's future? We'll look at the prospects for a diplomatic solution to war and hear how Afghans want the peace process to move forward.
What are your thoughts on how the war in Afghanistan could be resolved? Share them with us via Twitter or in our live YouTube chat.
Hi, I'm Shukri Barakzai, Afghan ambassador in Oslo and Afghan women's rights activist. You are in the stream.
During an event honoring the victims of the 9/11 attacks, US President Donald Trump on Wednesday threatened the Taliban with even more military action and blamed the group for the sudden end to peace talks between the US government and Afghan Taliban leaders.
We had peace talks scheduled a few days ago. I called them off when I learned that they had killed a great American soldier from Puerto Rico and 11 other innocent people. They thought they would use this attack to show strength, but actually what they showed is unrelenting weakness. The last 4 days, we have hit our enemy harder than they have ever been hit before, and that will continue.
Trump called off peace talks in a series of tweets on Saturday. His tweets also revealed a cancelled secret meeting with Taliban leaders that was to be held at the presidential compound in Cape David, Maryland, just days before the 9/11 anniversary. A Taliban spokesman criticized the US president for calling off the dialogue and said the move would result in even more casualties in what has become the longest war in American history.
So today, we'll look at how the shift in diplomacy could impact security for the Afghan people. And joining us to talk about this in Kabul, Sadiq Siddiqui, spokesperson to the president of Afghanistan. In London, Horiya Mossadegh, she's the executive director of the Conflict Analysis Network and a human rights campaigner with the Afghan group Time for Real Peace. And in Doha, aljazeera correspondent Charlotte Bellis. Welcome everyone to the stream. I want to start online, where there's so much conversation over the past few days about these peace talks, which much for secretive, and about the calling off of them. So I'll start here with Ghani, an Afghan journalist who writes, by unexpectedly calling off the peace talks with the Taliban, which were in its final stages, President Trump raises doubts about his determination to responsibly end the endless war of the US in Afghanistan. Sadiq, I'll give this one to you because after 18 years of war, is this how the government of Afghanistan views it as well?
No, first of all, let me say hi to you and to your colleagues and to others who are on the show. No, I think we should put the blame on the Taliban because imagine the United States opened up a venue of negotiation with them, with a group, which is a minority, it's a small group to what the Afghan government and to our allies are. So they never committed themselves to a peace, to a path in which all us and the US and our Western allies, we wanted to give them an opportunity or a political settlement in which we can end this war. But it's very sad that after 10 months or 1 year of negotiation with the United States, Taliban intensifies their attack and they never reduce the level of violence. So at the end, we can only blame the Taliban because on their side, we did not see any sign of commitment toward peace. We are committed to peace. The US is committed to peace. But if the Taliban are not committed to peace, so it's sad that we have to really call off this and look into other opportunities in which we can end this war.
Charlotte, you've been covering these peace talks for some time now. I'm just looking here on my laptop. The US Special Representative Zalmay Khalilzad, He said on August the 31st, "We are at the threshold of an agreement that will reduce violence and open the door for Afghans to sit together to negotiate an honourable and sustainable peace and a unified sovereign Afghanistan that does not threaten the United States, its allies or any other country." Now, all during this time, of course, there has been violence with the Taliban. They have been attacked. They haven't stopped attacking, but still, there's glowing optimism coming off from the US Special Representative. So what happened?
So there was optimism from both sides the entire time, no matter what was going on behind closed doors. And I'm in Qatar, they were happening in Qatar. We'd go down to the diplomatic club and we'd sit there in this cafeteria and watch both sides. And you could tell their body language was tense. But at the end of the day, they'd always put out a tweet saying, positive steps, excellent steps. It got to a joke where the Americans and the Taliban were looking up a thesaurus as to say, like, what kind of positive word can we use today to convince everybody that things are moving in the right direction. So when that tweet went out from Khalilzad, they were right on the cusp. They essentially had a deal in principle. The Taliban told me this week that they had actually initialed a deal and given a deal to the Qatari negotiators and the Americans to take forward. They thought that it was, signed and delivered, and they'd have a signing ceremony within the week, and they were very surprised when the tweets went out.
I'm just wondering, because Sadiq was saying that the Taliban blew it, but you're saying that things were continuing. Is it possible that the idea or the strategy to keep fighting in Afghanistan by the Taliban, did they scupper the peace talks? Or could a single tweet or a series of tweets by somebody who's very well known for being quite mischievous on Twitter, could that derail the entire process?
Well, yes, is the short answer. But I think that essentially the Taliban overplayed their hand. That was what I got from. I was in the talks on Thursday when Khalilzad and General Miller snuck out of Kabul 2 days before this was all called off. They showed up at the diplomatic club. Things were very tense because the Taliban had kind of upped their game, if you will, in the battlefield all last week. Why? Nobody knows. I mean, they had a deal right there. And essentially, they overplayed their hand looking for more leverage. They launched attacks in provincial capitals. They did 2 big attacks in Kabul. They killed an American soldier. I mean, how can you go forward as an American and Trump with those kind of optics and say, okay, fine, let's sign the deal and we'll just forget about what happened in the last week? It doesn't show that the Taliban were negotiating in the right spirit of the agreement.
And your take is interesting there, especially given some of the skepticism from people online who you're saying that the Taliban overplayed their hand, and I think many people would agree with you. But I want to share this from Adnan on YouTube, who says the Taliban was and is ready to negotiate. They have only one demand: leave Afghanistan. It's their country. They are the majority. They will govern themselves. Now, someone else wrote back, this is Snow Wales, who says, this is something that we wish to do, speaking as an American. Trust me, a lot of Americans oppose staying in Afghanistan, but leaving now would be a risk to our national security. Again, speaking about the United States. Huriya, what has this meant for the Afghan people and people in Afghanistan?
Well, the issue of the peace talks, as soon as it emerged to the public domain, it opened quite a lot of hope among Afghans, because honestly, for a country that is going through 4 decades of war and witnessed so many atrocities and human rights violations, this was a lifetime opportunity. But unfortunately, what we have seen that all parties to the conflict, including the US and the Taliban, they started using civilian lives as a triumph or as a trophy for gaining more leverage for the peace talks. And that was the reason that it spoiled the whole issue of the peace talks in Afghanistan. But at the same time, I do believe that, the peace talks will start sometimes again. But what is really the most concerning issue among many Afghans, while we try to stay hopeful, but at the same time, for us, the main dilemma is why all the talks are happening in secrecy. why the details of those talks are kept away from the eyes of Afghans. And we are the ones who are suffering. We are the ones who are paying for the war that has started 40 years ago, and it is going on. And this is the right of Afghan people to know what is on the table and what are being traded off in return for peace. But unfortunately, U.S. withhold this honesty, dictate every detail from the Afghans, and this is the most, I would say, frustration that comes from many Afghans, that if this piece is about us, why it happens behind the closed doors, why it happens in secrecy.
Sadiq, these are questions for you. Go ahead.
Yes. So first of all, when you look at those comments, you need to realize what kind of a group the Taliban are. We should not forget what are their aims, why they continue to kill Afghans in a very vicious way, in a very violent way, and what is their end game. So the end game is to control over a geography, which is Afghanistan. They don't care about people. It's very obvious, because they have continued killing people for a long time now. So they want this geography to turn this into a safe haven to many other radical groups in the region. So there was a friend, Adnan, he said, the US should go and let the Taliban come because they are majority. They are not. They are a minority group affiliated strongly with many other terrorist groups, not only in the region, but also internationally. The number 2 of Al-Qaeda, Al-Zawahiri, is still...
So, Sadiq, are you saying that you just don't... Sadiq, if I may, because Huria asked some very direct questions. She wanted to know why are the people in Afghanistan not being told how the peace talks are going. And she was very direct. Are you saying because you don't want to talk to the Taliban,
no,
you don't want to deal with them?
No. She was right, because we were also left in the dark as a government. So most of the details of that long process were not shared with the Afghan government. So we were not included in that negotiation that was happening. So I would say the same thing as Mrs. Musaddiq said. That's why we then raised our concern about that probable peace deal that was about to come out. So we had many legitimate concerns. We had an understanding of this deal and its consequences. So that's why we openly and publicly came out and actually showed our opposition to this deal that was about to come to an agreement between the Taliban and Mr. Khalilzad. So we have to look again into the process. Yes.
Hi, sorry, Mr. Sadiq. It's Charlotte here. I know you say you're in the dark. You are the spokesman for the president. Why? And it's your country. You're the legitimate party that controls it. Why not say to the Americans when they come to you with the peace deal, I'm sorry, it's our country, and we don't accept it, or we do accept it, or we want these changes made? I never heard any feedback come from the government that said we're pushing back.
No, we say that repeatedly to Mr. Khalilzad that, the way that things are now moving in the past so many months, that's not going to bring a sustainable peace to Afghanistan. So the peace process, or any peace process for Afghanistan, must be led by the Afghan government, must be owned by the Afghan people. So the Loya Jirga, or the Consultative Peace Council that gathered in Kabul on May, so 3,000 Afghans from across the country, they draw a roadmap for peace and gave it to the president. So we've asked it on many occasions, and that's why we say again, any key to end this conflict will be through the Afghan people, will be through the Afghan government, any legitimate government that would come in a couple of weeks. So our destiny, our political destiny, should not be dealt with in Qatar or in Islamabad or somewhere else. So the nation has changed. We have a different nation now, which is would know what to do, and the nation wants to lead its way. And publicly we raised our concern and even the president of Afghanistan on many occasions talked with Khalilzad, criticized the way he was doing, and the outcome that we were predicting was not something that could lead us to a sustainable peace.
So Sadiq, you mentioned your political destiny and Afghanistan's political destiny needing to be decided in Afghanistan. I want to go to Kabul. I want to bring in the voice of Ali Latifi, a journalist, a former Al Jazeera journalist as well. Here's Ali's take on that.
So I know for a fact that the cancellation of the peace talks won't change anything on the ground in Afghanistan, because the fact is that the average person in Afghanistan didn't know what was being discussed, and also because the Taliban and the US, who are the main parties to this agreement, or this supposed agreement, never stopped their attacks. But the more dangerous thing is that no one, not the president and his team, not the presidential candidates, not the United States, seem to have any kind of a real plan B of how they hope to reach a negotiated settlement, because the fact is that, you know, these military ways aren't succeeding in Afghanistan.
So Charlotte, I wonder if you can speak to that, especially given the fact that you were reporting in Afghanistan during the length of these talks. And so you got to witness firsthand the aftermath of what people are going through, the attacks that are not committed just by the Taliban, but also by ISIL and other armed groups. What were people telling you about what their lives are like and whether or not they recognize the importance or significance of these talks?
Well, I think people were just dealing with the aftermath of essentially both sides looking for leverage. I mean, the Taliban upped their attacks. The US never let their foot off the gas over the last year. And there were kind of record numbers of civilian casualties all this year. So they were feeling it a lot. I mean, Mr. Siddiqui, I'm sure, can attest to that as well. And I think with these peace talks falling over, it's only going to mean more bloodshed, really, because, you know, people will just look for more leverage to try to get the other side back to the table, however long it takes.
Guess I'm just going to show this.
Can I jump in here?
Yes, please, Sadiq, go ahead.
Yes. First of all, the Afghan security forces and with the support of the US forces, we were trying to deny any advantage to the Taliban. You know, that was more defensive operations because the Taliban were launching attacks. So we did not do anything to leverage any position as the Taliban were doing this. And at some point, even, you know, the level of violence spiked. But we were defending. You know, the attacks were by the Taliban. We were almost in defensive, and we pushed back on the Taliban. That was the pushback was not for the negotiation to get any leverage there, because the negotiation was taking place with the Taliban and the US. But the Taliban did the opposite. The Taliban, look at the level of the violence that went up. So what else can the Taliban do? If we today are worried about the consequences of this deal that is off right now, and we are concerned of the future violence, to what extent they can go? They have already gone to that highest level of violence.
Sadiq,
they have done anything that they wanted to do.
Sadiq, if I may,
so we will be there. The status quo is there. Let me just finish this. The status quo is there. That violence or increase in the violence or the attacks and the understanding of the Taliban with that tool and method is absolutely wrong. And they will not get
and let
anywhere.
me just emphasize that with a statement from a Taliban spokesman. We're just going to throw it up on the screen so our audience can also read it at the same time. So that gives you an idea of what the issue is there. So if we push forward, Huria, and we're looking at what is possible, this has not been an inclusive peace process. Does this opportunity of the talks, certainly being on pause right now, does that give you an opportunity for it to be more inclusive? Can you reset?
Well, I think still there is an opportunity that you can make these peace talks more inclusive, because, everyone in Afghanistan is tired of 40 years of war in the country. And second, unfortunately, from the beginning, after 2001, we have seen that how violence has been used by the Taliban on, and then the same by Americans and their international allies, which unfortunately caused a lot of suffering to the Afghan people. And this is what needs to be ended. And the only way that any peace could be durable and sustainable in a country like Afghanistan, that it has to be inclusive, it has to come from within Afghan society, and we have to deal with our past. Without dealing with our past, without dealing with our, the perpetrators and victims, and not bringing everyone around the table, any peace deal, we have witnessed deals that happened back in 1980s.
Horia, let me just ask you, because in the last few minutes of the show, how do you do that? Because you haven't had access to these talks so far. Sadiq is talking about how the actual country that is being talked about, that is at war, is being pushed out of the peacemaking process. So how do you get a seat at the table? It is your country.
Unfortunately, in the whole peace process, and the history has shown that we have more spoilers of peace than peacemakers. And these spoilers of peace are excluding the real voices and the Afghans from the peace talks. And one of those spoilers are the US itself. How US can think they can reach to peace in Afghanistan without including Afghans themselves? And this is a very basic question. Second, if US was to break peace with the Taliban, why they bombed and overthrew their regime in first place in 2001? Why they caused so much more violence and so much more suffering to the Afghans? So this is why I think we keep calling on and on through different campaigns, through different platforms, both at national and international level, and we are calling for inclusion of Afghans in the peace talks. And we are talking for intra-Afghan peace talks. Because the history has shown that, back in 1980s, in 1990s, and whenever there have been any deal and any talk which was top-down, which was between the governments, it didn't bring real peace for Afghans. Right. But the opposite, it led to further bloodshed, further suffering, displacement, and many other human rights violations in the country.
So Horia, it's a bleak picture you're painting there, but I think that our community would agree. I want to play a video comment from Romain. He's an assistant professor at Redbound University on what this means going forward. Have a listen.
If the talks between the US administration and the Taliban are indeed off, and we can't be actually certain that they are, there are two potential scenarios. The most likely one is that the US administration will maintain forces in Afghanistan, and then it's essentially business as usual, probably with higher levels of violence, both in terms of counter-terrorist operations and civilian casualties, and in terms of terrorist attacks. The other scenario is that the US starts withdrawing forces relatively quickly between now and the US presidential election of November 2020. If that's the case, then we can expect a very harsh Taliban regime combined with a return to a full-blown civil war, including the Taliban, of course, and former anti-Taliban factions, but also actors such as the Islamic State. And that would be catastrophic for Afghanistan.
So just as bleak of a picture that he's painting as well, Charlotte, do you think there's any way to restart these peace talks?
I think that they're still talking behind closed doors and trying to see if they can find some common ground again. But I think that it probably comes down to Trump at the end of the day, and who knows what he will do or what he will tweet. Can I just jump in on what he mentioned about ISIS there? Because that is one thing that has really kind of simmered under the talks this entire year that it's gone on, because the Americans are really concerned that they've got currently about 2,500 to 4,000 ISIS fighters in Afghanistan. They're really concerned that the hardline Taliban, if they don't want peace, may jump across to ISIS. And then that's a real problem, because if the Americans are leaving, and they're the ones currently keeping a lid on ISIS, then if they leave and the Taliban fracture and the hardliners go to ISIS, you've got a massive problem of counterterrorism there.
I'll end with Javed on Twitter, who says, advice I would give to U.S. officials working on peace negotiations: include the Afghan government in the process, as they represent Afghans, make concrete, evenly spaced out deadlines to be met by the Taliban, and do not rush a deal that lacks substance.
Can I say a last word here?
Sadiq, it would be a word. So
Yes,
we literally are wrapping up
so
here.
right now-
Sadiq, Korea, Charlotte, thank you so much. What is your word, Sadiq?
Yeah, right now there won't be any common ground for this peace process to restart. There's election coming up
You
in the
have the
country.
final
So after
words on the
election,
stream today.
you will
Thank
go
you
on
so
the
much,
peace
Sadiq.
process.
Thank you for watching. You'll find us always online. Take care, everybody.